thank you for agreeing, Christine, to be part of this EverEdge podcast series. We found this podcast series to cover more about the intangible assets and the sector that we cover. And one of the points that we like to do is we like to talk to our clients, and we like to talk to businesses, especially like yours, that focus specifically on intangible assets. And your company so much revolves around data and such good assets that we are very, very welcome, appreciative that you are able to join us today as a guest.
Right.
So for those that are joining, I'll just give a quick little bio of Christine. Christine is the founder and majority shareholder of CBA Group and CAITO, which is designed and is a highly led global solution for clients around helping them to match data and to be able to pull in very, very valuable information from their data. So Christine, you can probably go describe your company much better than me. If you could give us sort of a 2-minute intro to what you guys do, a little bit about your company profile, and then we'll kick things off. How about that?
That sounds fine. And you know me, you'll have to keep cutting me off probably. But look, just to, in a nutshell, really to explain the company. So cognitive artificial intelligence technologies really only came onto the scene probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and they were in their infancy then. And they've developed a lot since then. So what I explain to people is that these technologies, for the first time in history, allow organizations to access all of their unstructured data, which is largely natural language, but not solely, but largely that base. But the technologies actually read, learn, and understand it. So it's not like a keyword search and you're just looking for matches and so on. And so what that means is that there is so much data that people have been unable to access in the past that they now have access to. So what we do is allow them to do that, but it isn't just accessing, it's then, so what is this going to be used for and what problems is it going to be solved? And we've put a huge amount of time and investment into building our own platform so that we can build client solutions quite quickly from that.
Right.
But it's really a game changer. And I would say that if I wasn't even in this business, it's the biggest game changer I've seen in all the 28 years or whatever I've been in business.
Well, I think we're definitely seeing a significant movements into those spaces, and not just with you, but a lot of our clients that we see, the move into AI and data structuring is significantly evolving and very, very quickly. Christine, your business has evolved significantly over the past few years as we've worked with you. I've talked with you now a few times. So with COVID, expediting sort of these changes and movement into technology even faster. Could you tell us a bit about, the challenges that you've faced to overcome these and to be able to grow your business through this sort of COVID expansion time?
Yes, I can. And do you mind if I just go back a little bit before that too, because it all is all part of the picture. And so one of the biggest challenges that we've had, which you're aware of, because I'm sure I've talked to you about it, is to grow the business and its value without significant capital.
Right.
And trying to raise capital before you're successful has been quite hard. However, we're making good progress. But the fact of the matter is that over the last, say, 4 or 5 years, 3 or 4 years probably to be realistic, we have grown that value continuously. And one element of that is around our team. And so I can say this sort of hand on heart, every member of our team, no matter what their role is, have bought into our vision 100%. And we've had tough times financially, and they have never complained. They have worked harder than ever. They have kept using all of their skills around development and innovation and whatever. And so that value relating to the company has in large part, I believe, it's not just been about technology, even though that's a critical element, but it's around these wonderful people. And I think that bond that's created, right, you can't underestimate in terms of, this team is one of our highest value intangible assets to me, without a doubt.
Right. Yeah. Company culture and people. It's a big one. Yeah.
And we put a lot of effort into it, and I mean sincere effort. so that people feel part of something and they want it to succeed, and they're not ready to move on just because you have a few rough patches. So that's been a real part of it. But I think the other thing that I've done to try and grow the value is I've got a lot of international experience. I've worked around the world for many, many years. And so before COVID, I got on a plane to Singapore and decided that I would explore that market as an example of a global expansion or beginning of such that we wanted to have. We wanted an offshore strategy. And because our R&D team is actually based in New Zealand and is still based there. And of course, that was very successful. And I ended up, it doesn't happen overnight, but I ended up establishing CAITO Pte Limited, the company in Singapore. But since then, COVID's happened and you can't get on a plane anymore. And so therefore, we've continued that with remote access to people. And it's been okay. Like, I don't enjoy it as much as sitting with someone that you know face to face or someone new, but it works okay. And I think that's the new norm. So, we all have to go with that. But we have created, and I touched on it just a moment ago, we have created a culture of continuous research and development, continuous. Because what we realized is that even when COVID hit, for example, and customer opportunities, some of them were put on hold, which was disappointing, but understandable, we just kept that up because we thought, number one, we have to keep abreast of customer needs, of innovation. We had been, going back a little, right near the leading edge of this, and we didn't want to lose that just because of COVID. So that whole culture of research and development is absolutely embedded. And of course, the resultant technology and solutions and the platform additions and so on are a key intangible asset that we have. There's no doubt about that at all. But we've also continuously worked on our brand development during this time of COVID. There's no reason not to be promoting who we are and what we do and the things that we solve, so that our identity and our value has continued to grow. And LinkedIn is probably our key way to do that, but we have a few other channels obviously as well, but that's the key one. But we've also maintained really close customer relationships, even if they weren't ready to act yet. And this is just basic good business practice, but even more important when you've got a crisis, in the background. And of course, that's paid off because several of those have now come back at the beginning of this year and are ready to reinitiate. So, and I think that it would be very easy for people to think, oh, well, people aren't doing anything, so I'll leave them alone and I won't make contact and whatever. But we were just making contact, and particularly with senior people around the concerns they had and how they were getting on. But we also started our work from home journey. And we wondered whether this would be an interrupter in any way to keeping the value of this company growing. It's been not necessarily the opposite, but close. So what it's done is reinforce for me, number one, the trust that we already had, and I certainly had in our team members. Nobody has taken advantage of that. People work as hard, if not harder, than they've ever worked. We have a daily Zoom hookup, and they go through, I'm not on every one of those, but one of our other team leads that, and that's leading our agile development. And then we have a face-to-face meeting in a shared office space environment. We have a conference room or whatever, once a week or once a fortnight. And that's a social time, of course, as well as business. But what's been really interesting for me is that, and it's dramatically cheaper. I mean, the money we're saving from that is quite astounding.
Yeah.
On a whole lot of fronts. Now, we may go back to a little bit more time together, I think, and I think people are kind of ready for that, but it hasn't been unsuccessful. So all I'm really saying is, team research and development, customer relationships, brand, all of those things, and the drive to continue, have maintained, if not just maintained, they have grown the value during this time of COVID.
And I think a lot of businesses are seeing that same shift, that as they're relying on Zoom calls and being able to work remotely, they're seeing some of those same business benefits. And what was previously a fear sort of changed their views around it.
That's right.
And I think, you've talked about a lot of those intangible assets, but one of your core assets that we've seen is really taking data and really finding, being able to drive insights from company data. And companies now are amassing huge amounts of data.
Right.
And with your business being all about helping companies to unlock and leverage their data, which really has the potential to be, companies' most valuable assets if they use
Right.
it right. How do you see, data and AI driving value within, first your own company and then the clients that you work with? And how do you see that changing over the next few years?
Right. Okay. Look, and that's a great point to make, because one of the points I'll make first, and a lot of people are still surprised to hear this, is that almost all of the independent reports that you read from IDG and Gartner and others, they talk about the fact that about 80% of all data in organizations is unstructured
Mm.
and until recently unable to be accessed,
Yeah.
right, except by manual means. And
Right.
so therefore, that move to being able to access 80% of the data you haven't had before is like mind-blowing just for a start. But a percentage of that 80% is considered dark data, which means you don't even know you've got it.
No one's put the pieces together yet, right? You don't know who's working on what, right?
That's right. And
Okay.
so that means that with the cognitive AI technologies, you can actually access it, you can have it learned by the AI. So it actually learns the context and the meaning and so on. But then, and what we're doing, of course, is creating solutions that then use that for a particular purpose in the organization. And the kind of needs that the data can serve, and I'll deliberately keep it to the kind of stuff we're doing, but it applies to data more generally, I'm sure, anyway. But one of the most basic needs it meets is that you can increase productivity and reduce cost exponentially. Because instead of people having to manually do stuff and find information and then try and double check if it's right and all of those things, that time's diminished hugely. And so that's one thing. The other thing that we talk about with people quite a lot and they leap on quite often is the whole risk minimization. Because what it means is that when you're making decisions or you're providing advice or whatever it may be, you can have the very latest and most up-to-date information that you need in real time, simply by asking your computer for it. So it's there. And so that's
Right.
one thing that people really like as well. The other thing that increasingly people are interested in is allowing their customers to directly have the knowledge they need about your company. And so it started, and this is still the case, where people would ask for their customer-facing staff to have access to CAITO and some of the solutions so they could provide still the advice. And I'm not still against that, because the human element is still a really important part of it. But increasingly, we're seeing them now saying, could we also allow our customers to access this information directly? And the answer is yes. So long as it's not confidential or whatever, then of course they can. So that's another one. But one that I'm really excited about, and this is where my brain works most of the time, is in the whole strategic area. And so if you think about, for example, an executive team, and they have, and almost all of them have new strategies they're now trying to develop and execute, partly because of COVID, but also the world is changing with all of the things like climate change and sustainability and all kinds of stuff. So what we say to people is we can actually shorten your time for decision making and execution of that strategy significantly. It might even be by 50% if you could have at your fingertips all the information you need externally as well as internally, so it's from both sources, to allow you to make your strategic decisions more quickly and allow you to apply that knowledge that you're now getting quickly to, okay, what will we do in this part of the business or that part or whatever on an ongoing basis. And I won't name company names in this interview, but we've got a large multinational we're talking to at the moment who have just announced a new strategy where they're going to be moving their entire huge business away from some of what they've been doing to much more sustainable products and so on. And I hope at some point I'll be able to talk about who they are. But and so we're saying to them, what do you need to be able to do that effectively? And they said, well, we're going to have to do so much research. It may take us a couple of years to do the research to be able to have the information to make the right decisions. So we're saying we can cut that at least in half, if not considerably more. So that kind
And do you think they're valuing that savings of time? Or do you think people tend to underestimate the value of sort of the data sets that they have? Do you think they don't know it? They don't know how to access it? or they just completely, or sometimes maybe even grossly overestimate quality that might be very poorly structured or bad quality? What do you
Yeah,
see mostly in terms of over and underestimating companies' data sets?
right. That they probably underestimate the value, but they don't underestimate
Yeah.
things that have a dollar attached. So if the dollar is, we can save you huge amounts of time in getting to point A or B or C or whatever it is, then they're interested.
Yeah, they understand it in terms of time.
That's right. You
Yes,
know,
that's very,
so,
very common.
and
Yeah.
so that's one thing. But the other thing, of course, and I've done a lot of strategic consulting in my lifetime, and one of the things is actually making the right decisions. It's not just getting them done. And so if you had the benefit of having, say, a really big pool of external research from around the world or news articles and all of your internal data around whatever it is you're deciding, then obviously you've got the ability to make better decisions. So that's appealing to people,
Right.
because people are worried about the risk. And it's huge risk in trying to transform organisations that is of size. But the other thing is, when people are using our solution, we guarantee them data sovereignty. So what that means is that they're creating their own unique IP by the combination of data, external, internal, whatever it may be, that they are having the system learn. And so the creation of IP, of course, has a value to it, right? Let alone for decision making, but it has a value in terms of that. So that's partly there. But the thing that I also say to people, and this is a little bit less tangible for them to get a hold on, is that by using these technologies, it allows them to actually think differently. So if you already, so in answer to your question, if you already knew about your data and you might have undervalued it a bit or whatever, that's one thing. But another thing is to think, how could we actually think about this business or this part of it or whatever entirely differently? And by the way, that's the hardest part.
Right. Changing perception is definitely harder. Getting
Right.
people to
Yeah.
migrate their views away from that, right? Look,
Yeah.
and look, we, EverEdge has worked with CAITO on a few projects, and we do look at things like, assessing the value of your platforms and your data.
Right.
And you've talked about risk and helping people to identify and understand risks. What, like, on what was it that made you want to work with EverEdge to do the evaluation and risk projects? And has that changed how you approach your clients in
Right.
addressing their intangible assets, their data and their risk profiles and things?
Absolutely. And can I just be, I'm going to answer that.
Okay.
But beforehand, I've thought about why people might underestimate the value of their intangible assets. And I think that there are three quick things I can say about that.
Okay.
One of them is that their intangible assets really, if ever, have been taken into account in their financial assessments or their banks or their accountants or whatever, right? It just doesn't turn up. So they haven't thought about them as assets, right? So therefore, number two is, if they are not conscious of these assets, they know they've got them, but if they're not conscious about their value, then they just treat them as, well, this is what you have to do if you're in business, right? But if they started thinking of them as actual assets, what do you do with a house or a building or whatever? You maintain it, you look after it, you invest in it, all of those sorts of things. And I think that thinking is missing quite often,
Right.
is one of them. And until we met EverEdge Global, we didn't know about anyone who did and have real expertise in sound methodologies that actually value these things, right? So I think, so if you think about that, their current predominant providers don't think about them and don't value them. They don't consciously, as a business owner, think too much about them because they aren't showing us having any value anywhere. And now there are companies like yours, and I don't know how many, but certainly we would promote you, are saying, here are now people who can help you think about that. And so the reason that we decided, or I decided actually, to come to you is that I had actually become so, I think, and I've got a very positive personality, right? But I had become so demoralized by seeing the value of what I had been investing everything in over the past 4 or 5 years have a zero value on our balance sheet. Like, it was just demoralizing, to do that. And I tried valiantly to convince banks and others, because we were trying to raise money and so on, that what we were doing had enormous value. And I could see that before I ever met you, right? that it was at the leading edge of technology. It could solve major problems. There were major markets for it. Fell on deaf ears, right? No one interested.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty hard when you're driving hard to develop, something of value to do that. But when I met you actually and your team, it was the first time that I finally was talking to people who understood that. And you might think that's strange, the first time, but it really was the first time. And I think that when I understood your methodology and how you look at a wide range of inputs, it's not just what we've developed, for example, it's your markets and your competitors and all of that stuff as well, and obviously your projections and so on. It really made me realise that I wasn't going crazy, not that I ever really thought I was, but it kind of, it got me to a point of thinking, right, I'm never going to go into anything that I go into around the business feeling like I should apologise for the stage we're up to, for example, because developing something really new of really high value internationally, I'm not talking about something small, it doesn't take 5 minutes, right? But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have a value. And so I think that the assessment, the evaluation assessment that you did for us really vindicated what I already knew, but here was someone independent from us who had no vested interest in us and so on, being able to identify why what I thought was so. Right, so it was.
Yeah, well, I think, once you start to put numbers on things and you start to pull things apart, investors start to take notice and people can get their head around it. Like you said, you start to change a little bit of the mentality and the understanding.
That's right. And what it also meant is that even, as I said, not just during COVID, but throughout, it therefore made me really reinforce for myself that we must keep investing in our R&D program, because that is caring for and nurturing and adding value to those assets. And so we've done that. And so we've got amazing stuff now, that even from when I first met you. And so
would that be your advice? Would that be your advice to companies regarding making sure that they are recognizing these opportunities, as and the risks relating to what they're doing, those intangible assets they're creating and they're building, the businesses they're creating? Would it be that continual R&D, or what else would you say would be the biggest driver for you?
Yeah, I think that the thing I would seriously say, and I have to say to anyone watching this, you haven't paid me to have this interview, and I just believe you, but I would seriously say to people, talk to experts in the field of intangible assets, right? Actually talk to them and try and unpack what are the opportunities and risks and what you have. Like if you don't do that, you're just talking to yourself quite often, or you're talking to people who say, no, there's no value in that. So they must talk to you. And I think the other thing is, and this is quite a personal statement, but don't let the traditional financial institutions, methodologies, whatever, demoralize you. Because once you've talked to someone who does understand what you're doing, you realize there's no need to feel like that. And I think it's an important thing in terms of business confidence that people do that. Right. And I think, really believe in the value of your intangible assets, including, as I talked about earlier, your team. It all starts and ends probably as to that. And so I think that, if you just went away from this and you thought, oh, yeah, actually, I probably have got some intangible assets that are of value, you probably still wouldn't necessarily make the right decisions around them or value them properly. So my advice seriously would be to talk to people who understand that.
Well, with markets changing so much and, COVID sort of throwing everybody for a whirlwind over the past year and a half.
Right.
Where to from here for CAITO? What's your next steps? Right. And what should we be watching from your standpoint?
Right. Well, do keep an eye on us, because I'm quite convinced we're on the brink of great success. And that's not just blind positivity. That's all the work we've put in. I've learned in business over the years that if you do the right things, and that's the key, is figuring out the right things, but if you do those things and you are making progress, right, it gets to like a critical tipping point. And we feel, it's a little bit hard to describe it even, but those things all come together, and we have a real sense at the moment we're just on that tipping point of really taking off, right? And the business world is waking up after a year in hiatus, really. And we've got more international activity now than we've had for the last 12 months, which is absolutely great. We still need capital to execute our vision and our goals to expand and grow really quickly internationally. And so that has to be a focus for this year. It takes so much darn time doing that, but it's a critical element of us because I've actually got a very clear brain. I've done a lot of clear brain, not always, but I've done a lot of work in helping other organisations execute their strategies internationally. And so I know exactly what we need to do, and I need more advice always, but on how we would grow rapidly. And we're really determined, our focus has become clearer. So we're really determined on being part of the solution, if you like, to some of the world's biggest problems. And so CAITO Solutions absolutely can help organisations around sustainability of our planet and all of the related disciplines around that, having the right knowledge, being able to make good decisions, being able to keep looking at what's happening in the news and all sorts of things in real time, and also solving major business problems, of course, for our customers. And so our goal right at the moment is we've got to raise money still, but we need to prove that value, and we will. There's no doubt about that.
You know, Christine, one thing that, you know, I admire about you is you've started and run multiple businesses. You know, you've been in business, you know, quite a long time,
Right.
and you say you're still learning, you're still expanding, you're still going into new segments. It's you know, it's very admirable to see, you know, someone of your drive, who has been successful in the past, still continuing to push the boundaries. And you know, we look forward to see good things from CAITO. And what advice do you have for other companies that are just starting and or you know,
Yeah.
small businesses, or you know, for other companies that are looking ways to really expand their value
Right.
within their organizations?
There's
What advice would you give?
a couple of simple things. They're not so simple to do, but they're simple things. Is that my belief, and you've just said it, so thank you, born out of many years in business, is that it starts with having the vision and continuous drive, right, to actually try and achieve it. And you have to change en route and all of those sorts of things, but it can only be achieved through your people. So take care of them and make sure that they also benefit from your future success. And we've got plans in place to ensure that. But the second thing, and I'd say this to people everywhere, if you really do believe in what you're doing, you never give up. You don't give up. I mean, this last year has been a very, very difficult year for most businesses. And I know many people who have given up in that time, right? And they've closed their businesses. Now, maybe they weren't in the right business, who the heck knows? But there's a really interesting international study that took place over 10 years. And it looked at the characteristics of successful people in all kinds of fields. And believe it or not, it only came up with one characteristic that every one of those people had. And it was determined by one word: grit.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote. I mean, it's credited to Charles Darwin, and he says that, you know, it's not the biggest and the strongest species that survive; it's those that are the quickest to adapt to change. And I think that is so relevant with businesses. You know, businesses that have grit, determination, that are agile, that are quick to change. You know, and you see companies through the challenging period is, if they're quick to change and they have that determination to not give up, like you said, and they have that grit. You know, those are the companies that pull through.
Yeah.
So, look, Christine, I want to just say thank you again so much for your time today. And you know, it's always an honor to have such, you know, experienced business people on these podcasts. I get to meet so many interesting people and talk with so many interesting companies. Thank you so much for your time. So any last words of wisdom, you know, in a final say off in terms of what we can expect from CAITO in the next few months here?
Well, just keep an eye on us, because we're going to become known as a global brand and we're going to be very successful. But I just want to finish this by saying thank you, and I'm serious, thank you for changing my world.
Well, thank you so much, Christine. All right, and I look forward to watching CAITO. Until next time, have a great week.
You too. Thank you.
Mhm.